Oh, yeah, I also. Sanjay Chito Mata Sum to Yore, Carre Sena, Sanjay Chito, Jamdo do Semiche, Rova, Sanjay Chito, Suji Chono, Chanjo Bata Dani, Chasu Chesa, the Chandoche. Nagi Suji, Tuno, Genola Pech, Sanjay Nabasho, Sanga de Semiche, Rova. Adam Sanjay Chito, Suji Chono, Chanjo Bata Dani, Chasu Chesa, the Carre Sena. Oh, then I wrote another. Taking out of the Chuchea, the number Sanjay Chures. Rabachu Mambo, you be known the Tarite, Marathon Nova Sanjay Chure, Nova Sanjay Chus, Roala, and the Chandro Guatemala. Alexandro Bena, Nova Sanjay Chur and Rogumares, Tita, and the Sanjay Cheto, Suja Chonola, Chanjo Bata, Nani Chasu Chusad, Chandro Chevares.
So, good morning, and it's a pleasure to be here. Just now, I recited a very brief, and you all joined in this very brief prayer. And the prayer is generally known as refuge taking and Bodhicitta prayer. So in this prayer is it runs as a quatrain. It's just four verses. You can set it in two couplets, and the first two lines just expresses it's just an expression of taking of refuge or seeking of refuge in the Buddha, his teachings, and the spiritual community. And the second two lines stresses on the cultivation of mind of enlightenment. So these together, the four lines are called the refuge taking and Bodhicitta prayer. So first, in the first two lines runs in such a way, it just says to the Buddha, his teachings, and his spiritual community, I seek refuge. So this is particularly important, especially if you want to do Buddhist practice. So generally, one can do any form of spiritual practice. However, if you want to have it done in a Buddhist way, then making it in such a way and characterizing it in such a way that it becomes a Buddhist practice is important. So it is generally what distinguishes a Buddhist practice from non-Buddhist practice is the fact that it is the point or is the aspect of whether a practice is conjoined with this seeking of refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, or Buddha, his teaching and spiritual community. If a practice is supported by this seeking of refuge, then it is called a Buddhist practice. When it is not, then it becomes a very general, like you need not label it as a Buddhist practice.
Magi simche thong che the dog is over Sanje Jombo Toba Chavo and we look at Simche Lore. Unless Simche check the career resolution, Tangaroso Tangichova Noziga, Nava Sanje Chure, Nava Sanje Chudela, Teva maybe Chuda, Teva Chimichu Nisa. He that Taring Aroso Council, Teva Chimichure. He that Teva Chimichus and Rovala, Simche Goddess. Or the tell you that dog is also Jimmy Tonoje, Rola Page, Sanje Draba Show said. No, same shit. Say, you just said the telling all to Shayang Chu, the Tabachim choose on top, and the Tabachim choose on Rolla, same check, so much in the matter, same check on Mason, Tabachim choose on Rolla, each other, dog is to Jimmy Tuno, Genola Page, Sanjan, Robert Show said, same check about this.
So, having recited the first two lines pertaining to the practice of seeking refuge in the Buddha, his teachings, and spiritual community, then we recite the next two lines, which reads like this. It just goes with whatever merits I may have accumulated by means of generosity and so forth, may I attain enlightenment in order to benefit other sentient beings. So this is here, these two lines is what fulfills our cultivation of Bodhicitta, or the mind of enlightenment. And in particular here, again, the second is important because when we look at these four lines, the first line is important in the sense the first two lines distinguishes a Buddhist practice from a non-Buddhist practice. And the second two lines distinguishes a practice as a Mahayana practice from a non-Mahayana, or practice of a greater vehicle from practices of non-greater vehicles. So this is important. And again, when we recite the 2 lines, we have to lay emphasis, a lot of emphasis on the fact that this entire practice that relates to Mahayana teaching prioritizes the benefit of welfare and well-being of sentient beings as the greatest priority. So here, the entire practice is done as a way of benefiting other sentient beings, and attaining enlightenment is viewed as a way of achieving that. So the line, hence, therefore, thinking of all sentient beings as our mother, we recite that with whatever merits I might have accumulated by way of engaging in good practices, may I attain enlightenment so that I'll be of great benefit to all sentient beings.
So the tongue also Chuchola Toma, Gono de Kechabores, Gono de Shu Chembo Cheyona, and the Gawa Shu Chembo Yunga, so Kangas, Gawa Jache Machedon, Gawa and Romandolo. So Ganga Lola Tene, Gonola Lebares, Gonola Leba Yeta Shu Chine, another Sanjay Soja Chonola, Chajuba, Nari Chata, Dangas, Soja, Tono, Lola Picture, Sanjay Rabasho, Sangata, Nomas of Kaloke at the rest, Kalo de Karugua Reducena, the Kunjo Sola Shasa, Soye Gone. The Magaseja Tom, Jeje, the dog is Zube, Sanjay, Compoto Basha, T. Cheta Tane, Sushi say, no Basita, Kalo Tanichu go rest.
So, again, here, when we recite these 4 lines, on the outset, just looking at these 4 lines and reading the lines superficially, we get a sense that the first 2 lines talks about seeking of refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and then the next 2 lines talks about cultivating what is called the Bodhicitta, or the mind of enlightenment, that aims for state of enlightenment for the sake of sentient beings. So these 4, as just reading it superficially, it reads that way. However, if you look at the purpose of these 4 lines, this is to help straighten our motivation, help attune our motivation in the correct and in the virtuous way. So this is why, or the virtuous path, this is why it's important. So whenever someone engages in some Dharma practice, or in good form, any good deeds, or deeds of any good, wholesome, or virtuous nature, it's very important that one cultivates the right motivation. So because we are doing practice here, and we are about to study a text, therefore cultivating the right form of motivation is important. And here, in this case, when we cultivate this motivation, what we do is we first think that I'm going to study and I'm going to look into this text with this refuge-taking mind and with a deep intention to help sentient beings.
Yes, on the Tataring also share the longitude numbers Muse. Longitude numbers Muse. Longitude numbers Muse, Karusena, Ring, Janju Semo, Yanda, Tawasum, Della, longitude numbers Muse. Go to longitude, Segaya, Karusena, and a Lauriche Morgan, Woolishit, Malobi, Suju, about the logic of Mochi. Logic of Mochi, you know the thoughts and the graduation, say, on the Tawasal and Lord, as it is out and longitude, also Namsum Segata, José.
So here, today we will be studying and we will be reading this text. We all will be reading this text together, and that text that we will be reading is called the 3 principal aspects of the path. It is called the 3 principal aspects of the path. And when we look at this as 3 principal aspects, you might know that they are first the mind of renunciation, second the mind or intent for the state of enlightenment, for the state of enlightenment, that is the Bodhicitta, and third, which that is correct way or correct understanding of reality. So these 3 are the renunciation, Bodhicitta or mind of enlightenment, and correct view are here considered the 3 principal aspects of the path, or the 3 fundamentals of the spiritual path. And why do we call these three principles? The reason, because when we look at the text, particularly the text written by the same author, same author has written a text that is titled "The Great Treatise on the Stages of Path to Enlightenment." And the Great Treatise on the stages of path to enlightenment is done in a very detailed, elaborate, and very extensive manner. And it just starts from the very beginning of the practice, that is how to rely on a spiritual master, right up to the highest point, that is the state of unsurpassable state of enlightenment. So we have like the text presents and expands like multiple aspects of the path. And here, what the author does is author just focuses on the three principal aspects.
Lojo ya poche gore se kare jin langje zo number sa te ngaro so la me on karo che showa yena yo ngone chena lojo ro cha chong wa chi le lo lo yo go ya de te me na ya ni jue shang se yong da be ta wa sa te ro je se lo le go re ma to ane on to so to yo ma de sin de she ro ke che mo re.
So the three principal aspects of the path, when we look at these three principal aspects of the path, that is the mind of renunciation, or mind willing to renounce this mundane existence. Second, the bodhicitta, or the mind wishing for enlightenment in order to benefit others. And then third, the correct view or correct understanding of realities. These three are extremely important. The reason, because here we all practice, and whenever we go about and seek, for example, teachings, and say, for instance, tantric initiations of the highest order, that one called the highest yoga tantra. So when a person approaches and seeks highest yoga tantra, there are many requirements, and this is one of the basic requirements. Here, for someone to seeking the highest yoga tantra, if the ideal stage would be where the person has completed all the stages that are being laid out in the great treatises in the path treatises on the path to enlightenment. However, if they are not able to accomplish and complete all the stages, just having these three stages, again, having a good understanding of these three stages and having a genuine wish to cultivate these three stages are extremely important and essential.
Pejandel Tajare, Pejandel Loxonosa said, JJ me Jujel Tajare, and Dodana, also no Sugata, good and there, good. Jitalama no la chance law set. Jitalama no la chance law set. What on the Levigatane Karchagaro, Kechemo Yesumu there. What about Maru Cheva Jasal and Damara Mumbo Yore, Kosu Jede Jebegone Cheva Jabala Suba, Cheva Jasam and Damara Mumbo Yore. Sanje Chevde de Cheva Java, the Shajo Sambala Cheva Java, the Tane, or Cheta Nusala Cheva Java, so Cheva Java Mambo, Cheyobe None, Kandra, Lama La Chance or Sate, Lama La Chance or Sate, Geva Cheva Cheyore. And also Karu, Lama, also Yote Karu, Chena, Lama Latin Chegu. Lama de Shera Ketchemo, Soto with the future Lama Toso, when they to negata, Soto get him what's a go on. Nema Choros, Kava, Kabashiona, Temagi, Kaka Lange is with the Laman, yet a Laman on la chance, I love said the Lama Telamomoyor, Kaka Lange yore, Niago Sata Lange yore, and it the Sura Tel Lange yore, Ramada Momoyor, the Lama Lamala said, Raba. Monsire, Momojaga, the Lama del Naro, Momo Yumuyor, Soto the Lama de Ketchabore, Ketchab Yamatana, Sajabe Tagalo Suyore, you may say Rab Sayang, Meshameba, Memiju. There's a Sanje Chalajang, Lama Meba, Temiju said, when Yamatsabo Kase Yonayo, Meba Togumares, Pashiguala said, Tibari message Tajangayana, then Tassurus and Meba Yungres, Pete Nashiga. Riba, and it's Sanjay to them. Sanjay to Shala Chembo, you know, Tibaru, Lama de Mena, and it's Sanjay Shala, and also Young Togumare. Rama, Sanjeju Tele Sanada, Sanjeju Chela Sanada, Tipari de Lama de Mena Yunto Mera, Lama de Sela, Nade, Selama Shungu, the Lama de Sunguyare, Tita, Lama said the Ketchamore, then Lama so to the Shaya the Ketchamores.
So we will continue with this text, the reading of this text. I see the text. You might have read it. I think I can rely on the text that you put up on shantideva.org. There's one, I see a translation by Lama Tsongkhapa Rinpoche, so I'm reading this text right now. So it just says 3 principal aspects of the path. So 3 principal aspects of the path. And when we look at this very title, there are different ways how in publication, in Tibetan traditional publications, people write titles. And here, the title says such as that the topic is being used as the subject of discussion, or the topic of writing itself is used as a title here. So when you say 3, Rinpoche means to say that generally when we read Tibetan texts, the title tends to be very flowery, very poetic. However, here, it is rather than being poetic and flowery, it's just very straightforward. It just says 3 points of the path, or 3 fundamentals or principal aspects of the path. So here, the way the title is written is the topic itself is being used as a title here. And second, the text begins with an homage, and this is again a very traditional way of writing a text. Every single text begins with an expression of homage, or expression of homage. And I will just read the expression of homage here. It reads, I bow down to my perfect gurus. So I bow down to my perfect gurus. So when we read this text, we know that the homage is being expressed to gurus, or teachers, or masters. So generally, again, when it comes to expressing of homage, traditional Tibetan publications and traditional Tibetan practice or culture of writing has certain recommendation as to what and who the homage is to be, to whom the homage is to be expressed. Sometimes you find texts expressing homage to the Buddha, sometimes to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas together, sometimes to the great embodiment or divinities embodying knowledge and wisdom and so on. However, here, instead of paying homage to the Buddha, the Bodhisattvas, or even the embodiment of knowledge, expression has been done here, firstly, to the gurus. The reason because when we talk about gurus, and again, in Tibetan, the gurus is being spelled in plural, implying many gurus. So when we look at gurus, meaning, or the Tibetan word lamas, we can think of any teachers, guides, who have helped us through our path. So even someone who has taught, we might not remember well, but who has taught us alphabet like ABC, from that very point, everyone who has helped us gain and acquire knowledge, they are to be considered as our gurus. So, and hence with that sense of mind, and with that sense of deep respect and reverence, one should express, one must pay one's homage to all the teachers, all the guides who have helped us in our life. God. And again, yeah, do you want to do? Shall I? Yeah, and again here in terms of gurus, particularly sometimes when expression homage are being expressed to gurus, the qualities of gurus are being very much extolled and highlighted and are being stressed. For example, when it comes to extolling the qualities of the gurus, one great Tibetan master, Sakyapandita, he very clearly mentioned that a sun, no matter how hot it may be, will not be able to light a fire. And it is with the lens, the lens that people earlier used lens to light fire. So it says with the help of a lens, we can light fire, right? So such is the case. And this has been in the same stanza, Sakyapandita, with the same breath, Sakyapandita also says that Buddha might have given teachings, however, for it to really affect us in a very positive manner. It is the direct help of the teacher and the direct help of our guides who make that happen. So for that reason here in this text, the three principal aspects of the path, the expression is being first made to the perfect gurus.
Jase tomba no je nga belo jase shoju sambe ga yabo yawar se nga belo de chachu je semte che reba kade thade no je jungo te taba te de je koda no je ga jungo sena dosa long te one tada te gore o yamta be tawa o yamta be tawa te re o te sumte ta tanda te karo de sumte cheta nation da ke sheba cha de jermo che gro cheta nation da ke sheba cha te karo re sena da digo mone tone soge na de le la bo she to go yo ma de mone tone ga ja chenbo de te da jermo che ga cheta nation da ke sheba de ngaro she to se je she ga yisene de ka no go yo res ba 대송다 다테 다른 게 되는 제가 라마 생각이가 내가 조나 되나 너가 송 세물을 잡아야 돼 라마 저러서 라마 담아다 뭐 중요해 너 담아다 뭐 중요해 나네 아니 때 나사라 소바테네 때 조보나나 너 주시나 되는 내 주시 라마 청고를 내게도 때도 저보요는 될 라마 개체고 되니 저원인의 전이고 말해 강리지 연하여 소득 라마래 때 이제 이제 세물을 샤야 개체보나마도 뒤바를 뒤바나마도 선을 소득에 손을 놓으세요.
So here, the first expression here, in terms of expressing the homage, it says, "I bow to my perfect gurus." Now again, when we think of gurus, sometimes how a guru looks and how a guru behaves sometimes may affect and we may react in a similar manner. For example, we are naturally tempted when we come across a guru who is very grand and who sits on a high throne. We are very much attracted, and sometimes we are tempted, feeling that this person is really respectable, and we express excessive respect, and we are very humble. However, when we see a teacher who is not well clad and very humble and very poor, or even physically frail, we sometimes tend to look down, ignore. That you should completely be avoided, regardless of whether the person is sitting on a high throne or whether the person is lives in a very humble manner. They all should be treated with equal respect. If we distinguish between teachers on the basis of these external appearances, then that would not be a good action, and it might have negative karmic consequences. And again, so then having expressed homage, we then move to the next line or next stanza, that is called the promise of composition, that is the promise to compose. And I'll read the translation here. It just reads, the essential meaning of the victorious one's teachings, the path praised by all the holy victors and their children, the gateway of the fortunate ones desiring liberation. This I shall try to explain as much as I can. So we can also read this one as, rather than this, we can read it as these. So there are two ways of reading, and commentators, Rinpoche says, sometimes relate to this three lines as implying the three principal aspects of the path. the first line expressing renunciation, the second line expressing bodhicitta, and the third line expressing our indicating correct view. So first line, when we talk about the essential meaning of the Victorious One's teachings, we hear some commentator expound this line by including all the aspects of teachings that relates to how to cultivate a deep renunciation or a thought that would want to wish that wishes to renounce this mundane world of ours. And second, it talks of when we speak of path praised by the holy victors and the teaching, it is the Bodhisattva path. And then third one, when we talk about gateway of the fortunate one desiring liberation, so there comes the stress on liberation and attainment of liberation, which comes by way of cultivating a correct understanding, a correct view with regard to how things exist and function. And again, and this ends, the three lines ends with this line. This I shall try to explain as much as I can. So this stanza is generally called the promise of composition, and again in culture, in Tibetan culture of writing and publication, this is extremely important. Every text generally starts with a promise of composition, where the teacher or the author makes a promise that I'm going to write this. So that promise is extremely important. So here the author makes his promise of composition, where he says, I'm going to write, and then he lays down the abstract of the text, and then at the same time he expresses humility by saying that I shall try to explain as much as I can. So he says, I shall try and as much as I can. So there is this humility that's being expressed, which are important element in that we need to look into in the promise of composition.
Kanda sibe de la machashi, tanjo de chachir chumbayi, jawa jebe lamla yu tube, kade teta tongyo yu chi nye sate, ne de la nyemba kawa sate, ne de la nyemba kawa. Kanda sibe de la machashi, te tari tere, nongso nongso te tengo yo, nongcho so nomba so te tengo yo re, kanda sibe de la machashi sere ngenju de. Tanjo de chachir chumbayi sate, shangchu ju sem. Jawa jebe lamla yu tube, jawa jebe lamla tele, ne tanda tere, yongda be tawa, ruwa, yi teme, yapo da sep tenge ka kate teta, tene, tongwa chimpi kone yi che yapo chi nye shogu sene, te nyeba kawa res.
Now we will just read the second stanza here. Second stanza is the persuasion to listen. So here the author, having made the promise of composition, then urges readers to listen carefully. And again, in this urging, he just writes a stanza here. I'll read the stanza. It reads, those who are not attached to the pleasure of circling samsara, who strive to make freedom and endowments meaningful, who entrust themselves to the path pleasing the victorious ones, you fortunate ones, listen with a calm mind. So again, we have 4 lines. Their first 3 lines just itemizes 3 things, and then the final line, it just urges, it just it just persuades us, it just requests us to listen carefully with a calm mind. So when we read the first 3 lines, the first line reads, those who are not attached to the pleasure of circling. So when we talk about not being attached to the pleasure of circling, there is the desire to, or there's the thing that's being spoken of about, like detaching oneself, moving away from the pleasure of circling, which is renunciation. Second, when it talks about striving to make freedom and endowments meaningful, that means using our human life as a way of serving and benefiting other people. So that stresses on the bodhicitta. And third, when it talks about entrusting themselves to the path pleasing the victorious one, then again we are talking about the correct view. So again, in this persuasion of persuasion to listen, same as in promise of composition, we can relate and we can correlate the stanzas, the first 3 lines, with the 3 principal aspects of the path: renunciation, bodhicitta, and then correct view.
他能到研究没把新作业连带专业学院他没了，写了刚把研究理解了，个人清晰的通过研究杂志的，他当当研究上在用特别大把时间的，通过研究个别专业的，研究生的看的人就是呢，国外的研班就话，国外的把他的，他把两落在就落在了他研究时候的，别那国外的他的落些个的。Pena ngaro jite ba so yina saja chete le de sawa chembo do tene be ne na sa mombo la so tene yina saja jen do lo de jen lo yong ge re ba lo de jen lo yong ya de ka ru de so saja de lo de na ne na sa do sawa la so ba mombo che yo ba yi ta tene saja jen do lo de yong ge ba de na shi ge ko wa le ta de jen lo se ko wa de le de ge yina ne ne je ga na cho la so ba de nga mombo che yong se yong ge de se ko ro wa se ne de ale ko cho so Korwa singade saja desu kora mare. Korwa singade saja nyawane be pimbo korode. Korwa tamo kowa de hagogar. Kowa le ngepan juwa se kowa de hagogar. Kowa de karo de saja nyawane be pimbo dere. Dele tade chelo yongar. Dele tade chelo gar dele dena yabo mude ne na sala soba kanga de sala yongo yorba. Saja nyawane be pimbo la tene yongo yo ayita. Ane saja nyawane be pimbo de tade chelo yongar. Dele ngeju selo yores. Raba, tante jalo yongwa dewa karo, saje nyewa lebe pimbo dela tene, madeba kanga yongo duyo sore, tele tante jalo yongwa raba. O te ita, saje nyewa lebe pimbo dela kwa jawa, tele tante jalo dela, ane ngeju ka samba sago yore es.
So next year, having expressed homage, having expressed the promise of composition, and having expressed persuasion to listen, the author then begins his actual topic and begins with first of the three principal aspects of the path, or the first of the three fundamentals of the path, that is the purpose of that's renunciation. And when before explaining renunciation, he first lays down the purpose or the reason why we should cultivate the thought of renunciation. And I read the stanza here. It reads, without the complete intention, definitely to be free from circling, there is no way to pacify attachment, seeking pleasurable in the ocean of circling. Also, by craving for cyclic existence, embodied beings are continuously bound. Therefore, at the very beginning, seek renunciation. So here it explains why we should seek renunciation. So first thing, when we talk about renunciation, renunciation is the genuine wish to renounce something. So in this case, a state of existence, a state of form. So this genuine wish wanting to completely renounce a current state of form is called renunciation. So let's take, for example, in our daily life, for example, if we are living in it, we have found ourselves moving to a new place, and after some time, if we find the place to be unbearably hot or very cold, that we are not able to bear, or if the place has too much spread with too many diseases and sickness and difficulties, then we naturally develop this wish to want to move to another place, right? So when we find something, things that we are living with undesirable, then there naturally arises a yearning to move to a new place. So saying that state which wants and which desires to move to a new place is what is called the thought of renunciation. And with regard to spiritual practice, this entire existence of ours, this entire world of ours is considered to be something that we should renounce and move towards the better. And again, when we speak about renouncing, generally the word used here is circling or ocean of circling or cyclic existence or the samsara, which are different expression for worldly existence or this mundane existence of ours. And generally, when we think about samsara, we always think about external world, external place, the environment that we live in. And then we talk about renunciation as a way of wanting to leave one place and move towards another place. So in general, this is the renunciation. This is the definition of renunciation. But when we talk about where we renounce or what we renounce, rather than the place or the environment, it is the state of being. that our state of existence, our current state of existence, that is what is to be renounced. So this bodily existence, this composite of psychophysical aggregates that together makes up this individuality or this person, this I, is something that's to be renounced. The reason, because it says the current state of being is a state that results from negative karma and negative states of disturbing, because of engaging in negative karma and because of entertaining too many negative, disturbing, and deluded thoughts, that we have attained this. So the current state of mind, our current state of mind, body, and speech, everything is conditioned by way of these negative thoughts and karma. So therefore, this current state is what is to be renounced. So therefore, when we think about renouncing the samsara, more than the external world, more than the environment that we live in, it should be focused on the current state, current condition that we live in, and try to better ourselves and move to a better state.
Koala chapa dig doje yon, deje no kowa chino ramado koala to yoma rezo. What is this?
So it says, it talks about like when we read this stanza, the first two lines says, without the complete intention definitely to be free from circling, there is no way to pacify attachment, seeking pleasure effects in this ocean of circling. So here, for example, we find ourselves in this samsaric state, which is filled with suffering, pain, and dissatisfaction. And when we want to, if we want to rid this dissatisfaction, there should be a urge wanting to move to a better state where we can rid these suffering, pain, and dissatisfaction, number one. And number second, it says like, so without the wish to, without the mind desiring to renounce and willing to be free, it says there can be no freedom. So this desire for freedom is important in achieving freedom. And second, again, second two lines says, by craving for cyclic existence, embodied beings are continuously bound. Second thing is here, it says, when living in samsara, sometimes we, by way of our karma, previous karma, and negative states of mind, we naturally tend to crave for things which again binds us. So therefore, it talks of renunciation as a mind that is two-way, that is one that wishes to completely renounce something, and one that wishes to move to another place. So there's two-way sort of an attitude here that's being stressed.
Ngeju samba de chevala, sende nangshe don, sechime nangshe ni dogu yores. Ta sende nangshe se kare sendele lengoshe puso tsobado. Nye bala soba tene puso tsobado. To ko sala soba puso tsobado. Tede nye mayena sende nangshe res. Daga no je sechime no sechima la yo tene shewa ya po chedang. Lengoshe puso tsobala sobado. O ene taru and again,
when thinking about renunciation, here the thought of renunciation should be that one wishes to renounce this very state, this very state of existence, this very state of existence and form of rebirth we are looking at. And again, obviously in Buddhist teaching, we speak of rebirth and reincarnations. And so therefore, when talking about renunciation, cultivating renunciation to this life and to all the coming lives are both equally important. So when we talk about renouncing this life and renouncing things pertaining to this life and renouncing things pertaining to next life, we are basically talking about the pleasure, the wealth, the name, status, fame, everything that we experience in this life. So if we are attached to these things, then it's called attachment to this life. And so renunciation has to be such that one completely wishes to renounce everything that pertains to this life, as well as those similar things that we that might experience in our next and coming lives. So here, to avoid being attached to things but pleasures of this life, and also to completely reverse the attachment, one's attachment to pleasures that one might experience in the coming lives. Here, it's the author lays down the means how we can do that, and the stanza relating to how we can avoid attachment to pleasures of this life. The text reads like this. It says, freedom and endowments are difficult to find, and life has no time to spare. By gaining familiarity with this, attraction to the appearances of this life is reversed. So here, basically, it's talking about how the life, our current life, which is generally viewed as life that has lots of freedoms and endowments and leisures and good things, it is very difficult to find. Yet, that life is very short, and in life we don't have time as much to spare. So if we think about this, how short the life is, and by gaining familiarity with regard to this impermanent nature of life, it says we will be able to avoid being too distracted or too attached to pleasures of this life because of the life being too short. And again here, next it says how to avoid being too attached and too obsessed by things of pleasures of the coming lives. So which is again a trap, trap, right? So here it says, by thinking over and over again that actions and the effects are unbetraying, and repeatedly contemplating the miseries of cyclic existence, attraction to the appearances of future lives is reversed. So again here it says, when it comes to future lives, thinking about how, even though I might live again many lives in the future, but all my pleasures and state of experience will be determined by karma, and how it relates. It will be determined by this law of cause and effect, or law of causality. If we think about this over and again, then again it says this can help reverse. And not only this, but also thinking about, regardless of whatever state of rebirth we might attain, they are all filled with miseries, pain, and dissatisfaction. If you think about this, it says our attachment to not just this life, but also the coming lives or the future lives can be reversed.
Teta gombe koye pyonso la yume keche tamayam mecheche nese kundo tawa tenye lo yuna tete ngenju cheba la sate ngenju ko soma chima mamba jina shebe tsede teta gombe sade ane tanda yewna tajo nyeka tsela lume badam le jende malawala soba tene yong gombe tochi ane koye paso soba tene yume keche tonyo mo shewa nene tu shuna so da lo keche tonyo mo sheche. And you say got the Tabaton, Tabatani, the Lord, the Shiva Shuna, and it is in the so much is.
So, in the teaching on renunciation, it says we should cultivate the thought of renunciation, and then it talks about like even though we must cultivate renunciation, there is the likelihood and danger of our being, if not attached to pleasure of this life, then thinking about pleasure of next lives. Here it says both are to be avoided. We should try to renounce from renounce all pleasures pertaining to this life as well as to the coming lives. So, and then practice and by meditating and thinking about sufferings and miseries and so on. So it says when we do this over and again, then we reach a point where we perfect, and where we reach a point where marks the genuine cultivation of renunciation, on genuine generation of renunciation. So the next stanza explains what marks and what is the measure of having cultivated that kind of renunciation. So then thinking about that kind, the mark or the measure on the basis of which we determine whether a genuine thought of renunciation is cultivated or not is explained in this stanza. I'll read the stanza here. It says, when by having trained in that way, there is no arising even for a second of attraction to the perfections of cyclic existence, and all day and night the intention seeking liberation arises, then the thought of renunciation has been generated. So here, if we look at this, it talks about twofold causes for that marks the perfection of this genuine cultivation of renunciation. First, it says there should not even be a moment or a single instant where we feel an attraction to this life or the next lives, things pertaining. And secondly, it says day in and day out, there should be this very strong and intense desire to attain liberation. So if these two, when these two happen spontaneously, when this wish wanting to renounce this current state and the desire, the wish aspiring to attain the complete freedom or liberation, when these happens spontaneously, then that marks the genuine cultivation of renunciation.
Di kari tenga yore di shina, nyeju go somba sheba yina yo, ngaro so toja tatu da lana meba yoto ba zube sanje jo kombo rabas. Te ita ta, de to togo mare, nyeju go somba toje, lana meba yoto ba zube sanje jo kombo to togo mare. Te to bala, shanju jo semite gogo yore es. Te ita tanda dere, lode no je shanju semcho she sa te rowa, nyeju tenya namda se she je, samba mena name shanju je. Also, David Jera, Maja Vilana, Bavota, Zube, Soja, Koboto, Jera, Roga Maravas, Mondoba, Alodeno, you to say about the Google S.O.T.
Then, having explained the thought of renunciation, that which is the first of the three principal aspects of the path, that is the wish to renounce the pleasures of this samsara or this cyclic existence of ours, the author then moves on to the second point, that is cultivating an altruistic mind for enlightenment. So altruistic intent for enlightenment, where driven by altruism, a person aspires for enlightenment to be able to benefit other sentient beings. So it says we have to move. The author then moves and stresses on the second point. When explaining the second point, it says that by cultivating renunciation has its own good. However, here it says if we rely on renunciation alone, we might not be able to attain supreme enlightenment, the highest of enlightenment or attainment. The reason because it says highest enlightenment comes by way of cultivating altruism and by being consideration of others, whereas renunciation is more focused on the finding of freedom for oneself. So it talks about moving from one's concern for one's own good to concern for the well-being of all sentient beings. So explaining this, it says, having cultivated renunciation, we then have to graduate towards the cultivation of bodhicitta. And in this, the author writes here, even if renunciation has been developed, if it is not possessed by the mind of enlightenment, it does not become the cause of the perfect bliss of unsurpassed enlightenment. Therefore, the wise generate the supreme mind of enlightenment. So this clearly talks about how, in addition to renunciation, one should cultivate and altruistic, a genuine and pure altruism is wishing for enlightenment in order to save sentient beings.
Chanchu save Chevala, and near Nije Chimbo Chigore. Nije Chevala, and a Seja Dunga Janasa de Hakugor. They thought Seja Dunga Janasa Shegor, Cosmo, and Shura Choje, Genji Chesat in Karajuna, and Jediji Choshi, Rediji Choshi, and Jetroyor. Jediji Choshi tell Je Ga Na Chig Dunga Shetere. Rediji Choshi said the Shura Choshi, Genji Chesat, and Rediji Choshi. Rediji Choshi tell a Sibi Cho, Debi Cho, Tavi Cho, and Yemumbe Cho, or Yemumbe Choshi. Agotara. Shiro Choshi, Genji, that's a gentle Choshi, Koroto Shulma, Judge Chelo, yes. Our party part taken, really do to your money, do cover legislature, and made them set. Rava party Judge Chesa, the Markatu Marchego, Rava. I do none of the party take away or chose, or tell a do cover. Do Kalekabo, do Kalekabo, you but the legislature, Tommy, Unato, Combat or Labato, Damsha, yes. When the Tema said, Tane Coroso, Danza Charge, Tavi Busso, Kodal Danza to Chija Danza, so we charge Tavi Busso, they are, yes. The one Yazula is on a patso, they are, yes. The Tema said, Marie Bembe, Maja Canita, Marie Bembe, Coroto, Carsacaruta. Marche said, no chambers, oh, turning to the orders. And the Mumbai Sibachi, Chewa decided, Mumbai was at a Tameba. Siban called Mamala Shevadon, Shamala Shevan Jawa, there is. The tea and you do the tea, and they got Dungas and Jemeba nowadays, Dungasum, and they doing it, doing a Jewy, doing a Chaba de Jeju, doing a Dungasumche. As one. Dunga singer the Tata Teresonga to Jitebe, go now, so much go now, so what Dunga Dunga. And Jimmy Dunga said the Saji Deware. When a session bola said, Kalana Sani Temate, but Dunga Yonji or what's the Ted. Chaba de Jitu Dunga said the Saji and be people dead. To sit in the man about the Chab de Yota, Chaba de Jitu Dunga. Agota, what? There's a book who get Jebe, Nadi or yes. Nade about nega the Rachebe Manam, she said. The matters of Tanichi read the sonnet, matters of Monta the Sone, and I showed you to the cemetery we are, yes, what it is.
So what we have here is in the first aspect of enlightenment, first of the three principal aspects. In the first aspect, the author stresses cultivating renunciation. It explains how the state that we are in is suffering by nature, and that we should try to we should cultivate a wish to renounce the current state. And then it talks about hence move towards liberation and find freedom. And then it moves further and says that when it comes to freedom here, with just the renunciation, we might not be able to, we might be able to find freedom for ourselves. However, we will not be able to attain the supreme state of enlightenment. The reason because of the thought of renunciation concerned about oneself being too narrow. So therefore, it talks about how to be broad, how to be all-encompassing, and therefore, stresses on the cultivation of what is called the Bodhicitta, or the altruistic mind of enlightenment, which is a mind that aspires for enlightenment to benefit other sentient beings. Now, to do that, the author then says that it cannot be done outrightly. We should go through stages. That is, like, to cultivate bodhicitta, one must first cultivate compassion, and therefore it stresses on compassion. And again, he here talks about how compassion is a state of mind that looks at sentient beings and then cultivates a genuine wish to free sentient beings from all sufferings and their causes. That compassion is essential for cultivating bodhicitta. And then here, therefore, because to cultivate compassion, because Compassion is the cause that gives rise to altruistic mind of enlightenment. Therefore, one should cultivate compassion. Now, how do we cultivate compassion? And for this, the author says that we should try to look at other sentient beings and look at how all sentient beings, regardless of what state they are in, whatever forms of existence they are in, they are all overwhelmed and overcome and are subjected to suffering, pains, and dissatisfaction. And this the author explained in this next two stanzas. Here, I'll read the first one. It says, swept away by the current of the fourfold powerful rivers, tied by the tight bonds of karma, so hard to undo, caught in the iron net of self-grasping, completely enveloped by the total darkness of ignorance. And then next stanza says, endlessly reborn in cyclic existence, ceaselessly tormented by the three sufferings, thinking that all mother sentient beings are in such condition, generate supreme mind of enlightenment. So here, being swept away by the current, being tied by the bond of karma, caught in the iron net, enveloped by darkness, endlessly reborn in cyclic existence over and over again, ceaselessly tormented by threefold suffering. They all relates to how we suffer. And again, here Rinpoche says, it talks about the fourfold river. It draws the analogy of four powerful rivers. And when we talk about four powerful rivers, it is an analogy that's used as a way of explaining the types of sufferings that we experience as ordinary sentient beings. When we talk about the fourfold rivers, it can be spoken by way of the four causal rivers and then the four resultant rivers. When it comes to four causal rivers, it relates to four types of sufferings, that is the suffering of birth, aging, sickness, and death. So these birth, aging, we all sentient beings go through this pain, sufferings. So they are generally called the four causal rivers, the causal rivers that binds us, rivers of sufferings. Next, it talks about the four resultant rivers, and they include the existential sufferings, second sufferings pertaining to holding of different intellectual views and philosophical positions. And now third, it talks about those arising out of contaminated state of desire and attachment. And fourth, it talks about the deluded states of mind in general. So because of us all, because of ordinary sentient beings being overcome by this, their state of mind being overcome and completely filled with these many different types of desire, deluded states of mind, views, and so on, they are being we are considered to be in a suffering state. And again, further in the second line, it talks about how, as ordinary sentient beings, we are bound, and we are tightly bound by the karma. And it says we are tightly bound by the karma, which is so difficult to undo. The reason because karma, once committed, negative karma tend to bind us hard. So therefore, it says we are all suffering because our sufferings are determined by the karma. That is what we have done in our previous lives. And then again, it talks about how we are as if we are completely put in a net of self-grasping. It stresses on how we are so self-engrossed, we are so egotistic and very egoistic, and we are bound by this very net that we create around ourselves. And at the same time, it says we are like completely bereft of any wisdom. We are completely enveloped by this darkness of ignorance. And further says that sentient beings, when we look around sentient beings, we might look outwardly, people might look very good, in a good state. However, when we look closely, regardless of where a person is, right from the highest in the Buddhist cosmology, they talk about what is called the peak of Sitse, or peak of existence, right unto the lowest of the state. All sentient beings are overcome by these three different kinds of suffering. Again, it lists sufferings. It has many different enumerations of sufferings. It talks about the fourfold, and so on. And then it talks about the threefold, general sufferings. And when we talk about threefold general sufferings, it says they are firstly what is called the suffering in addition or upon suffering, that is the manifest suffering, suffering that we see, such as having headache, having body ache, not being well, and so on. And then it talks about sickness and everything. Second, it talks about after manifest suffering is what we suffering and what we suffer and what we in conventional term call suffering. And second types of suffering is called what is known as the suffering of change, or suffering that comes in the form of a change. That is, and the second type of suffering include all the pleasurable forms of experience that we have and feel in our life. In our life, we might find something as pleasurable, something as good, something as enjoyable. However, they all give rise to suffering when we experience or when we enjoy them in excess, or when we enjoy them for too long. So something that might be enjoyable, but where we go too much excess, the excess or too long, like experiencing of that object gives rise to pain. Therefore, it's called the second one. Third, again, it's called the pervasive suffering. The reason because firstly, it pervades throughout our very existence, and second, regardless of where we go, this kind of our very existence is considered to be suffering. So here it talks about the threefold suffering. First, the manifest suffering, that's the external suffering that we see. Second, the suffering of change, that is suffering that it comes to us and we experience in the form of pleasure. And third comes our very existence. It says our very existence is suffering by nature, because that is the basis on which and why we suffer.
소소 dunga jana tsalo sono chere matoba seje dunga jana tsalo sono tona nije yongya yongmares. Deita tomba soso dunga jana tsala sono togar. Soso dunga jana natsa sone ngenju de. Soso dunga jana tsa so atela ngenju de. Je seje dunga jana tsa so mala de nije she yongore. Deita nije she wala ngela ngenju garwa. Ngenju she wala tamna soso dunga jana tsa so mate shero ke chemores.
Again, here, in terms of thinking about sufferings or meditating on sufferings, when we talk about that, it is extremely important to begin and to maintain a proper order or sequence in terms of how we meditate. Firstly, when thinking about meditation or thinking about suffering, we should first focus on our personal sufferings, how we suffer, what our state is. So we should try to think about, for example, the threefold sufferings, what forms of threefold sufferings we suffer, and so on. And once we think about how my very existence is very much liable to and creating more sufferings, and it's by itself is suffering by nature, then we desire a wish, wanting to move out from this current state, and that is renunciation. Then once we perfect in the cultivation of thinking about or cultivation of this understanding of suffering of self, that is the personal suffering, then we graduate and we move on to thinking about suffering of other sentient beings. And then when we think about other sentient beings, we feel a deep sense of sympathy, empathy, and thereby arises compassion, which leads to Bodhicitta. So this is the second force. So again, just as we had a renunciation and Bodhicitta, same applies to thinking about suffering. We first think about our own suffering, then we extend and think about all sufferings that inflict and torment all sentient beings.
Nelu to be shira medena, Ninju Chanju similar Kongshang, Sebe Zawa Chuba, Menebe, Teacher tended to be Talambe, Ninju the Shanju Senior Yonayo, Kwe Zawache Togomares, Rava Kwe Zawache Togomare, Kwe Zawache Bala, Yonda Betawa, Nelly to be Shira to go your res. Teita, Toro Togotene, Nelly to be Shira. Madena, Ninju Shanju similar, Consejang, Sibe Zawacheba, Menebite Sunga, Teacher tended to be Talambe, Manetane Chilena, Teacher Nelly to be Talambe La Goyar. Enemy Yonto Chena, Nelly to be Shira, Madena, Ninju Shanju Sela, Consejang, Sibe Zawacheba, Menebite, Teacher Nelly to be Talambe Segoa, Segoa Yimbala, a Jeromoja, Teacher tended to be Talambe said, the Koya Chepo Yosungoyar. Rava, Panata Robert Segena, Teacher tended to be Tal. Tenede, Nelu to be Tare. Nelu to be Tare, Naruto, Dijino, Roger met Tende Yemishar Sade. Tende Tane Roger to be Tomato Gorva, Nelu to be Tare. Show China, Nelu to be Talamego, Tende to be Talabesade. Yancho China, Tende Tamo the two with Nelu Tubar. Tende Taramoyo, Tende Tamo the two with Nelu Tubaita, Tis and Nelu to be Talabesana, Jigudes a chair. Shooting, Teacher tended to be Talamesa, tended to be Taida, Tata, what is Sumudus?
Next year, having explained and stressed on the cultivation of renunciation and bodhicitta, then the author moves on to the third point, that is cultivating the right view or the correct view or the correct understanding. So here, and so firstly, the author explains the reason to meditate on the right view, and the author writes here, without the wisdom realizing ultimate reality, even though you have generated renunciation and the mind of enlightenment, you cannot cut the root cause of circling. Therefore, attempt the method to realize dependent arising. So this is it very clearly says you might have renunciation, you might have bodhicitta, but without the correct view, it's not going to help. It's not going to help cut the root of samsara. We will still be stuck here. So therefore, it says we should cultivate dependent arising. Now, when we look at the stanza and read the stanza, sometimes we find that sometimes it by reading it, it just outrightly appear a bit inconsistent, because it says without wisdom, and then finally it says therefore practice the method of. So actually it should be without wisdom, this would not happen. Therefore, practice and cultivate the method of wisdom. Okay, train of method of wisdom. That's how it should be done. However, rather than saying because wisdom is important, therefore cultivate method of wisdom, it says because wisdom is important, therefore cultivate in the method of understanding interdependent arising or dependent arising or relational existence of phenomena like that. Right. So here it says, Rinpoche says, there's a big reason to why it is being done. Firstly, when you talk about dependent arising, there are two major interpretations, a commentary that explained it in two different ways. The first line of interpretation says that when you talk about dependent arising here, it is talking about the coarse level of wisdom. So when thinking about dependent arising, and then we look at things and their relational or dependent existence, it says it can be understood in two different levels, one in a very coarse level and then one second next in a very subtle level. And coarse level is considered to be the very initial stages. And when one attains an understanding of the subtle relational nature of things, then it says we attain wisdom. So wisdom is equated to the subtle understanding of dependent arising, and coarse understanding of dependent arising is explained as a means towards getting to the subtle stage or the understanding of the subtle stage. That's the one interpretation. Second, it says some maintains that dependent arising, again, it just relates to explains and talks about the thing's existence or the ontological nature of the things, and therefore understanding physical things and outward things helps cultivate wisdom. So then here they are viewed as one helping cultivate the other, that is dependent arising as one thing and wisdom as another thing, and understanding of this dependent nature helping cultivate that state of mind called wisdom. So there are two major interpretations on this stanza.
Nyangele debi chusenge de jang lamde gomala tene debon gode toba rwa jene no yo lawa me ba te tongxie ta ta nyu go yo ba te tongxie mi be te so ko kong ye ga xie ba mi ba sa de dang zhe che go da ge dang da la so be ge mi be ge te so kong ye ba te ga xie ba wo me ba te to so na ane tene sangje je be lam la shu sangje je be lo yong da be ta wa le shu ba de es ge wa sangje je be lam sa de yong da be ta wa Yang tapi tahu jelas siapa tidak ese, ese itu.
Yang tapi tahu jelas siapa ese. Yang tapi tahu di jelas siapa ese tidak jelas.
Yang tapi tahu le siapa ese. Ada ngeju sama le siapa dah, sejauh je sem le siapa dah. Ada yang tapi tahu le siapa ese. Sahaja jebe lam sengete yang tapi tahu le siapa, betul le siapa ese.
So next here, the stanza talks about talks about who enters the path, who enters the path that is called the right view, or who or what marks the entering into the third principal aspects called the right view. So here I'll just read the stanza. Here it says, one who sees the cause and effect of all phenomena of both cyclic existence and the state beyond sorrow as forever unbetraying, and for whom any object trusted in by the grasping mind has completely disappeared, has at that time entered the path pleasing the Buddha. So again here, it talks about, when we talk about path pleasing the Buddha, it's basically talking about right view or the correct view. And the stanza explains what type of person, or how do we determine whether a person has entered the path pleasing the Buddha or entered the right view, what is called or termed as the right view. So here the author draws two criteria here. The first criterion here, it says that one should have a very strong conviction with regard to the cause and effects, that cause and effect is the underlying, very underlying sort of nature. It just determines the existence in all. Every single thing that exists is dependent on causes, the interdependence of cause and effect, and it says that this law of causality pervades and spreads across existence. It talks about from the lowest of the cyclic existence right up to the state beyond sorrow, that is the unsurpassed state of enlightenment. Everywhere it says the causes, the nature of causality, or the law of causality, or law of karma is pervading, is seen pervading. And second, when one, so the first is being convinced that such law pervades across existence. And second, it says that if the person, it says, so next here, it talks about, I'm sorry, I'm just looking too much here. Next it says that with that sort of understanding, when grasping, when our perception of the object, because of it talks about like when the first criterion is be able to be convinced that everything that exists is governed by law of causality, law of karma, and second is to have the grasping mind, or the mind that grasps onto thing and think that this or something truly or very intrinsically or something independently exists, if that completely just dissipates or completely declines, that marks a person's entry into the path of into the path that pleases the Buddha or into the right view. Yes.
Gomba bena on tane togo mares. Mas mato bacha nge tomba ni ge teze shege is. Tomba ni senga de raje je trebe tomba. Raje je trebe tomba senga de karo ko rangi ne to ya mare je che la ten chunga re mato koro ranto chi chunga mare se de raje je trebe tomba senga de otene tomba che na de res. Karo yina ngaro so taba yina so taba yina je la ten pama ni la ten chunga re ba. Ranto chi chunga mare ba. Ote ole che chena yo 소소 그때들 공간이 손으로 해야 싫어 개chamore 알아 소소 그때들 소소 라제제 때문에 동바이 바텔 손으로 해야 싫어 개chamore 라제제 때문에 동바이 바테 내 단도 쉬어야 되네 예라 때문에 좀 알아 봐 라제제 때문에 예라 마테 말에 나도 예라 때 말다 아니 라제제 때문에 동바래 뒤때문에 공부하시나 되거래 영어면은 아로도 엄마 놀라 타제 답에 따제 짜외 채나 많이 해봤어야 그러봐 고자 소소 짜네 뭐네 마 공부받아 짜네 고대 소소 레베 그래도 레베 라바도 레베 들어서 맞자네 짜와니네요 말에 짜와니네요 말에 매발에 세계에는 아니 칼라 사와라 소바 레가 레고요 봐 어떻게다 짜네 대용대 내려 도면 다 야슈데 대이수고 말 nomba든지 제다 많이 봤으니 그러봐 어떤이 제가 자나요 내가 됐다 소소소 라제제 때문에 동화 예마들 동화야 보전이야 봐지 제거를 말도 제가 온터서 산에 도고 말했어.
So we are through this we are through this section that explains the third principal aspects of the path, that is right view. And when we talk about right view here, the idea or the concept of interdependent or dependent arising and then emptiness is very important. So when we talk about dependent arising, another word we speak of emptiness. And again, this view of emptiness is understanding and having a knowledge of having an understanding, clear understanding of what emptiness means is extremely important and helpful. The reason because as a practitioner, we seek and we receive initiations. So whenever we go seek initiation, knowing and understanding, having a very sort of general understanding of emptiness is essential. It is needed. So we talk about emptiness, and therefore I will just briefly explain and talk about emptiness here. Now, when we talk about emptiness, it just very plainly says emptiness relates to things existence, things form of existence that's devoid of any sort of intrinsic or inherent self. So something existing, but without existing in a way where it lack any intrinsic, inherent, or independent form of existence. That is emptiness. Now, to further elaborate, for example, we can look at ourselves. So when we look at ourselves, for example, everything in this world is considered to be empty. And emptiness and interdependent arising go hand in hand. When we talk about emptiness, something is empty because of being dependent on something. For example, in terms of person, a person, for example, we all are born from our parents. So when we think about our existence, we are born from our parents, we come from our parents, and we are dependent on parents. So dependent nature implies that we don't have an intrinsic, inherent, and independent existence of our own. So this dependence and reliance on other completely negates in any form of independent existence, because independence and dependence are completely opposites. So if something is dependent, it can be independent. So this completely lack of any independent, inherent and intrinsic nature or form of existence in us, or a form of self in us, is what is called emptiness. And again, when you think about emptiness, when look at emptiness, it can be viewed in different ways. There are multiple forms of reasoning that we can adopt. There are different lines of logic that we can adopt and we can apply to understand how things are empty. For example, one way of looking at it is what is being explained in when it was being explained and very much propagated by a great master Chandrakirti in his text, supplement to the middle way, which is called Madhyamaka Avatara. Therein, he outlines, for example, the sevenfold reasonings to understanding emptiness. And therein, by way of outlining and laying out the sevenfold reasoning, he talks about conceptual designation. He says that we all exist. We all exist. We all have a form of existence because they are conceptually designated on us. We consider ourselves as we call something because we designate it as such. And it says when we dig into this, for example, when we dig into this, Rinpoche says, for example, if we take ourselves as an example, we say, I exist here. And now the next question comes, who is this I? Who is this I? Is it your head? Is it your body? Is it what part of you is you? So, or is it one of the parts, or is it a composite of the part, or is it something outside of the part or inside? So we can look at it in there are multiple ways of looking at it. So when we dig into this and look into where the intrinsic self, where the self that I refer to myself as I exists, we will not find it. We cannot find it. So that completely sort of the entire notion of the self or I completely crumbles, completely falls off. And it falls off, but despite it falling off, I still exist. I wake up in the morning, I eat, I walk, I still exist. So therefore, ultimately, on an absolute ground, I don't exist when I analyze very closely and look at and search for the intrinsic inherent self. But on a relational manner, on a provisional ground, on a conventional ground, I exist because I'm being referred to as I. So this ability to understand this twofold aspect of existence, that is the empty nature, where it lacks any inherent intrinsic existence, and the dependent nature where things exist in a relational manner. Knowing and understanding and balancing the two is crucial here.
Tomba ronje je traba kele me kele do tawe ko senana ronje je trabe tomba ni raba chese so no wa tese tese ne so lo no la tende ya po ja ko gele la ronje je trabe tomba de sha mo to raje je trabe tomba cha gele tende sha mo to ba so ne ga wa ta ba do de ba ti se raba 다들 대비 공부 다들 또 요마레스 그봐 또마 켈레터요 공 제제 소도노와 대제 다들 대비 공부 또 봐매사 공부 다들 또 요마레스 어때다시
Now here in the next stanza it talks about so in the previous one we relate in connection with the previous stanza we just briefly looked at a notion of emptiness and also the dependent arising dependent arising. Now next here talks about like what are the possibilities or what are the likelihood that where we feel we have attained an understanding of emptiness, but in real sense we have not. So we might sometimes be in the misconception that we have understood, but in fact we have not. So that in order to make us aware of this, the author writes the next stanza. He says, if the appearance of dependent relation, which is unbetraying, is accepted separately from emptiness, and as long as they are seen as separate, then one has still not realized the Buddha's intent. So therefore, it says, we talk about emptiness, we talk about relational nature, the dependent arising. However, both are to be viewed on the same basis, on the same. If a person looks at emptiness and thinks that this is something very different and separate from dependent arising or relational existence, then it says the person has still not gotten a sense of the correct view, because as Rinpoche mentioned here, when we look at person, when we dig ourselves and search for us, we don't find ourselves, and that aspect is emptiness. But then despite I not intrinsically, inherently, independently existent, I function, I live, I work. That is the relational existence. So both relational and existence and emptiness should be placed and be applied to the same entity, and should not be viewed as completely two different and separate entities.
Namashi Renjo Meba Chija the Tender Milatum Tamini, Nishi Yujin, Zatung Kochina, the Zetavi Chava Zubala Asad, Rava, Namashi Renjo Meba, Rava, Roger de Tribe Toma lawyer the Chagre, Tender lawyer the Chataba, a tender lawyer the Chava Zonja, Roger de Toma lawyer the Chataba Shuna, Rava, they said the Nitavi Chava the Zuba Resud.
So next year, having explained this danger, the blind spots that the author then moves on and explain what marks the point of gaining or attaining this, what is called the correct view or correct understanding or the right view. So in this, the author says here, if these two realizations are happening simultaneously without alternation, and from merely seeing dependent relation as completely unbetraying, the definite ascertainment that completely destroys the way all objects are apprehended as truly existence, at that time, the analysis of the ultimate view is complete. So therefore here, it just says that in the previous stanza, it talks about how to think about emptiness, empty nature of things, how to think about the dependent nature or relational nature of things, how they are important. But and then it talks about like how they should be viewed on the same, how they share the same entities, the same basis. And then now, when it comes to explaining the mark of having perfected in this correct understanding, it says, if these two understanding happens without alternation, if this two understanding arises in the same object simultaneously, that marks the perfection of correct view. That is like if the person thinks about, just as Rinpoche says, if we are thinking about I, and we think I don't exist, the underlying reason is I don't exist independently because I'm dependent by nature. And things are dependent by nature, therefore things don't have independent nature. So these two understanding, when they happen together without alternation, that marks the perfection of having understood or gained a correct view. That's
Yeah, no, you ta se wa dang. Dombe me ta se che domba ni. Je dong de bo cha be zhi xian na. Tang zhe dai zhu ba min zhu ro cha de, ba. Yeah, no, you ta se wa cha de. Yeah, je ru mo cha tu mo mo yi ba yu su gu de. No, you ta se xian da de zhu gang de no ye me ta se de ba. Tang ga lu su tang de je ru mo che no ye ta se wa de se. Ba. No ye ta se wa de ka lu de zhi xian na. Rong ru zo zo rong ji ji zhe ba no wa zhe re ma dong. Then we did the Yama, and Yata the Silver, Rava. Then don't make a meta says at it. Don't make meta says at it. Roger de Trebe, don't make it. Mumani Shashi Dugas. Roger de Trebe, don't make the Koro, Tanya the Yabachi Jaya Dugas. They that the meta said, lose, Rava. And they don't ever have a session outside of it. Roger de Trebe, don't make they don't ever. I have a session. And Roger de Trabanzabe, Tanzabe, Tavi, never Yungoma, other Tavi Troba, Major Rose, what they.
So next it talks about, the next stanza explains the particular special quality of the Prasankhika view. So here in this stanza, it talks about the unique philosophical position of the Prasangika view. And this is, again, in this uniqueness, when we read the stanza, we also find the unique position that has been explained, our unique philosophical position of Rinpoche or Tsongkhapa. So here, I will just read the stanza here. It says, furthermore, appearance eliminates the extreme of existence, emptiness eliminates the extreme of non-existence. If you realize how emptiness manifests in the manner of cause and effect, then you are not captivated by wrong notions, holding extreme views. So here, the first two lines here, it just says that appearance eliminates the extreme of existence, and emptiness eliminates the extreme of non-existence. Thereby, we talk about two different extremes, philosophical extremes or philosophical viewpoint that we might falter. That is, we might think like things exist inherently or independently, something that is the extreme of existence. Then things not existing at all, that's the extreme of non-existence. So it says, if one cultivates a correct understanding of emptiness that is based on the understanding of dependent arising, then one will be able to avoid the two extremes. Now, in terms of avoiding of extremes, this is the unique position of Rinpoche's Tsongkhapa's unique position is that Tsongkhapa here says appearance eliminates the extreme of existence. So it says appearance, the things that we see, all the appearance, for example, appearance of things that we see, it says it eliminates the extreme of existence. In other philosophical schools, many other philosophical schools, philosophical proponents of philosophical Prasangika views, they say that appearance eliminates the extreme of non-existence. So extreme of non-existence, if something appears, then it means that it just clears and it avoids someone moving and faltering to the extreme of non-existence. But Tsongkhapa's unique position is that appearance eliminates the extreme of existence, meaning just because something exists, appearance itself is dependent by nature. Therefore, it just avoids true existence. And same way, when you talk about emptiness doesn't mean non-exist. It doesn't clearly talk about things avoiding just utter non-existence. It's talking about things. Knowing emptiness helps avoid the extreme of utter non-existence. Reason because in emptiness, the person sees things. Because when we talk about emptiness, we are basically talking about emptiness of something and not emptiness in itself.
Joy. This again, the Kurusu, the temple de Grava, you get the Tani, temple de Grava, you major mother Lapal Tresusela. That the Dangazon, the Moncha, may have the same temple at the end.
The Lobsang Delek.
Matujenga, what's to the Kundaka Voyaging. Mother Lapal made a shake mesela. Moncha do Gilpana do Moncha Pevare. What's it only? You may have gone to Kagachi Kayakisha. This Ogayana, Mahuba in a Peja, the Soto Choya de La Palion, this is the Sugar. And it's that Jagger. But other name, other Dela Toja Goja, Katushi Yukula, you may have Hakomas.
So, Rinpoche says, in terms of this text, I was giving teachings in California and also in Boston. And in California, the audience mostly comprised of Tibetan-speaking people, and in Boston it was a mix. And then in California, in Boston, I made sure that every Tibetan, for example, they have a text in the text with them. I did not know there was an English translation, but he says if there's an English translation, sometimes having the translation reviewing and trying to refresh our memory of what is being said by looking at the text can sometimes be helpful. Yeah, and I was explaining that you all are into this text. You know the stuff.
Also no said the Jerobo Chakon Tabal Tone, Chakon Tabasanga Jeron, Yamuru Mayorva, Telema Tone, Loto no said the Matone, Teta Longe, no such a name, no range change to be said. Combo to Yabu and Lojo and Yabu to Sona, then Yamatan Soto Chibola, then the Banolech and Digger Eswer. Then the money the Dushi Pusa and Yevit. Lusen, Raba. This on that Andele, Naruto, Chorosena, Karina, Karu Gongayona, Yabo, Jen, Lon, Toto, never let Gumjagar. Jeromocha, Gomoda, Jago, Jogoni, Jagude, Choto, Chaba, Jeda, Totajano, so Jago, Jogoma, Jogamato. Raba Jeromocha, Yahalevico, Yaboresha. Karu Tache, and Karu Red, the Rema, the Tache, Tata, Lola, Yamos and Ezo, the Gomjano, Nigurava. Mother rotated the other chilling you could Mother Shell Goya, Teta, Della telling us about Soto Yabo and Eva Channel, and a Gomja should do us a thing out of Sola Calores.
So finally, the concluding stanza, we will just, I'll just read the concluding stanza here. It says, the stanza, in the outline, the section headlining says, having gained definite ascertainment, advice on pursuing the practice. So in this stanza, the author, Rinpoche, says, in this way, you realize exactly the vital points of the three principal aspects of the path. Resort to seeking solitude, generate the power of effort, and quickly accomplish your final goal, my child. So here, in this stanza, it says that you should resort to seeking solitude, generate effort, and then try to accomplish the goal only after you have understood this 3 points precisely and exactly. And that is being very much stressed here. And this text called The Three Principal Aspects of the Path was written by Rinpoche for his disciple, Tsakung Awantapa. Tsakung Awantapa was at that point living in Gerong. It's in the eastern part of Tibet, and Rinpoche sent this and wrote this for Tsakung Awantapa here. So when we read this text, the stress is too much laid in exact realization of the topic before sitting and doing any form of solitude meditation. This again is a unique stress and emphasis that is being laid by Tsongkhapa. Many masters, they would, when it comes to meditation, we have this twofold, of the multiple meditation, two are general form of meditation are being stressed. First called the analytical meditation, and second called the fixed or the placed meditation or the concentrated meditation. I'm sorry, fixed or the placed meditation. So of these two, analytical meditation and the fixed single-pointed fixed meditation, do we call fixed meditation? Placement meditation, thank you so much. So fixed placement meditation and analytical meditation, where form of meditation, analytical meditation, obviously, form where a person conducts analysis, and second placement is where a person directs the mind and places the mind single-pointedly on that object. So of these two, Rinpoche stresses on analytical meditation, and he always says that meditation should always be preceded by analytical meditation. And like different than other masters, some master may straight away stress on placement meditation, but Tsongkhapa Rinpoche says that, for example, in terms of emptiness, one should first think and know how things are empty. Without knowing and analyzing emptiness properly, there is no point meditating on emptiness, because if without having properly analyzed emptiness and without having gained a clear understanding of what emptiness is, if you just sit and start meditating, doing meditation in a placement meditation way, Rinpoche says you will feel bored, and if you extend further, you will feel sleepy. So therefore, it is best to be avoided. And this form of twofold order in terms of approaching topic can be applied across our practice. Every time we see something, we should try to analyze first. And once we are convinced of our analysis, what the result of analysis, only then we sit and meditate in a single pointed sort of a concentrated manner. So with this, we very briefly conclude our study and our study of this text, Jerome Rinpoche's text, three principal aspects of the path. And it is very fortunate for me, as well as for all of us, to be here, to gather here and to study this text. And especially, I very much appreciate you all coming and spending time here. The reason, because obviously I know you all work and despite today being a weekend day, you still care to spend time for this text, and I very much hope that this text helps us all develop things in a very positive, So again, when it comes to practicing, doing spiritual practice, sometimes it is really hard to, sometimes we might find challenges as we do practice. The reason, because we generally say we do spiritual practice and the result or the goal or the goals or the results or the fruits, when we talk about that, they are too far out there, like enlightenment, liberation, freedom, and then next lives, many lives. So it's all out there. And sometimes when explaining these things, it says even for me, sometimes it is really a challenge talking about the next lives or the coming lives, which are not easily demonstrable here. You cannot demonstrate and show or things out here. However, we should look at, when it comes to things of next lives or the enlightenment and liberation, we should just sit, study the text, analyze, look at the reason, apply the reasoning, and look at the reasons that are used to prove those concepts, those theories, and then with a strong conviction that exists, we then start to we should do spiritual practice. And with spiritual practice, it definitely, regardless of how far it will bring good things in the coming and the next lives or in the liberation, it will definitely make us a better person in this life. So again, here we have gathered here for a spiritual practice, and we have spent time here studying this text, thinking about this text, and also, and by way of this, what we have here is generally, when we talk about this as a spiritual practice, even though it is not visible here, text says that engaging in studies like this help accumulate enormous merits. So it says enormous merits, and therefore, because we have collected and accumulated, and we believe that we have accumulated enormous merits, the text says that it is very important that we dedicate the merits for well-being of all sentient beings. That is, if we do something good and we don't dedicate the merits, generally it is believed that there is a great danger of the merits that we accumulate being destroyed or being losing that sort of merit. So therefore, each time we do something good, we should try to dedicate that, may whatever merits this practice might have bring, may it help attain enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. So we will think about this. We will think about how by our sitting here and engaging in this practice, we have accumulated merits, and then we will pray that with whatever merits I've accumulated, may I attain enlightenment to benefit sentient beings. So Rinpoche says, I will recite the dedication prayer, and while I recite the dedication prayer, please dedicate whatever merits you have for the well-being, for the happiness, and for all sentient beings, and for their freedom from sufferings and the causes. Sorry, do you say? Oh, no, it's 2:30, right? Yeah. Okay, I thought like it's 1 and I want to ask question or like. That's okay. That's yes, please.
You're in mute.
I think Zoom. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. We will do a mandala offering. You're welcome to chant along for those online, and the prayers are over there in the back if you share. Idam Guru. And thank you everyone so much for joining online. Really appreciate your patience as well as your attention.
Thank you. Further. Yeah, come here. Yeah.
Okay.
Take a group of them.
Thank you.
You have a phone? Cover this. Someone have a group of them. I will take. Give you. Yeah. Yeah. Very. Close. कुछ जगह
Okay.
You want yes? Yeah. Please have.
Closer.
Close.
Here's one to squeeze it. Squeeze it over this way.
What's in on? It's good. You little bit move the
chair-
forward. No, back forward.
Oh,
Back,
back. Move the
back.
chair back so it doesn't block the people behind
No,
you.
you come back.
Just ask you to get up for a second. May I just ask you to get up for a second? I'm going to pull the chair.
Oh, back. Oh.
Everybody can scoot it a little bit more. Jenna, I don't think we'll see you there. Jenna.
No problem. This over, yeah.
Is that okay? Is it, are we in? No?
1, 2, 3. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, welcome. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.